Okay, so you know that feeling you get like when you see those crazy fitness transformations online, or you hear people at the gym talking about how to get ripped super fast?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you sent us this really interesting article.
Yeah.
And it dives right into one of the most talked about things when it comes to that. It's SARMs.
Yeah.
Selective androgen receptor modulators.
Right.
And we're going to like unpack what this source tells us about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how they kind of fit into this whole picture of like, you know, wanting to achieve certain results.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this source so valuable for this deep dive that we're doing is that it's not just like theoretical information, right?
Right.
This is coming from somebody who has actually used SARMs and has coached other people on them as well.
Right.
So we're getting that real world experience combined with some of the more factual stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us a much richer understanding of what's really going on.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we want to do for you today. Is like, we're not going to get into like crazy scientific details and like super complex stuff.
Right.
But we are going to explore, you know, what are SARMs?
Yeah.
Like, what do people say they do?
Right.
Why are they so appealing? And then most importantly, like the potential downsides that this source is highlighting.
Exactly.
So our mission is to kind of like give you a clear and balanced picture based on the information that you've shared.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start with like what makes SARMs so attractive in the first place.
I think this source really nails that initial draw.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about this feeling of rapid progress.
Right.
And the author actually uses a really powerful image.
Okay.
They describe it as feeling like Superman.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that promise of quickly getting stronger, building muscle faster than you thought possible.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge motivator.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. And I think it taps into this kind of like deep-seated desire for immediate results. Right. It's like a shortcut to strength and all the things that people associate with that.
Yeah, totally.
You know, admiration and all that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key insight into why SARMs are initially attractive.
And you also can't ignore the impact of social media, right?
Absolutely not.
Like you're constantly being bombarded with these images of like these seemingly unattainable physiques.
Right.
And the source points out how this can breed feelings of inadequacy, especially among like younger people who are constantly comparing themselves to these images online. And like, how can they get that look?
Right. It's that desire for instant gratification.
Right.
Which is being amplified by these often filtered realities that we see online.
Totally.
Right. And the source is actually quite direct about this.
Yeah.
They basically say achieving some of those extreme physiques naturally is unlikely.
Right.
Right. And I think that kind of honesty is really valuable.
Yeah.
When we're looking at this topic.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is that this person's speaking from experience, really. Like they're not just like theorizing about it.
Yeah.
They actually say like SARMs do work.
Right.
Like they genuinely work when it comes to building muscle. They even list specific ones that they've used.
Right, yeah.
Like Ostarine Red 140,
Yeah.
S4, LGD4E 33, saying they all led to like noticeable muscle gains. So the source is clear on their effectiveness in that regard.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is how the source then transitions. Right. They acknowledge that initial appeal and the effectiveness, but then they immediately pivot to this crucial question.
Yeah.
What happens when you stop using them?
Right.
Because they're very clear that these positive effects are not permanent.
Yeah, it's not like you build the muscle naturally and it's like you keep it as long as you keep working out. The gains that you experience aren't sustainable in the same way. The author discusses like that loss of gains, like the muscle mass, the strength, even that pumped feeling you get after a workout. And they suggest that the amount that you might lose depends on whether you've pushed past your natural genetic limits.
Exactly.
Like how far have you gone beyond what your body would typically be capable of?
So they suggest that if you've gone beyond what your body would naturally be capable of, you might lose almost all of it.
Wow.
And even if you're newer to training, you could still see around half of those gains disappear.
Right.
So that's significant.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it creates kind of this negative feedback loop, right? Because the source highlights that strong urge to immediately start taking SARMs again.
Oh, yeah.
Once you start to feel that decline in your physique.
Of course.
And your motivation even.
Yeah.
It's like you're trying to chase that initial feeling of rapid progress.
Exactly. It's like you're always trying to recapture that.
Right.
So we see this natural consequence of stopping the loss of progress.
Yeah.
Directly feeds into this powerful psychological drive to jump back in.
Totally.
So it creates almost this self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah. And while we're talking about like what happens after stopping, the source does mention some potential side effects that can occur during use.
Right.
Things like high blood pressure, increased cholesterol levels, and importantly, a decrease in natural testosterone production.
Right. And these are not things to take lightly.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Which brings us to what the source really emphasizes as a central concern, this testosterone suppression. So can you explain like why that is such a critical issue with SARMs, according to this information?
So the source is highlighting that SARMs, while they're designed to be selective, they can still interfere with the body's natural signals that tell the testes to produce testosterone. So it leads to a decrease in its production.
Right.
And what's particularly striking is this comparison they make in the source. The author suggests that in some instances, the level of testosterone suppression can actually be even greater than what might be seen with certain anabolic steroids. So that's a pretty powerful statement.
It is, yeah. And the consequences of low testosterone, as this source outlines, go beyond just like muscle loss.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It impacts overall well-being on like a fundamental level.
It really does.
Like we're talking about just feeling generally unwell, having sleep problems, and then the really significant issues of reduced or even complete loss of sex drive. As well as erectile dysfunction.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. So the source also talks about PCT.
Right, post-cycle therapy. So after stopping SARMs, people often turn to PCT, which involves using other drugs to try and stimulate the body's natural testosterone production back to normal levels. But the author points out something really important. PCT isn't always successful. Particularly when it comes to fully restoring libido. So that's a key detail to note.
It is, yeah. And then there's the potential long-term implications of this repeated suppression, which are quite concerning.
They are.
Right? The source raises the possibility that repeatedly lowering your natural testosterone levels through SARM use could eventually lead to needing HRT.
Hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, later in life. And they actually share their own personal experience with this. So it kind of paints this picture of a lasting impact.
It really does.
On your hormonal health.
It underscores the point that these aren't just like short-term interventions. Without potential long-term consequences. Right? Your body's endocrine system is delicate. And repeated disruption can have lasting effects. And I think it raises a really important question about weighing those potential short-term gains against the possible long-term risks to your health.
Totally. And the source also touches on just how accessible SARMs have become, especially when you compare it to the past. And this seems to be like a big concern for the author.
It is a huge concern. The contrast is pretty stark. The author remembers a time when SARMs were basically unheard of. And even anabolic steroids were really difficult to obtain. But now with the internet and social media, it's a completely different situation. A simple online search can lead you to vendors selling these substances. It's a problem.
And this ease of access contributes to the worry about teenagers using SARMs. The source expresses like really strong concerns about this.
Driven by that desire to emulate fitness influencers. And achieve those rapid physical transformations. Teenagers might not fully understand the long-term consequences that SARMs can have on their developing bodies and their hormonal systems. So the source is strongly advising against teenage use.
Of course.
Emphasizing those negative impacts that could last a lifetime.
Which really highlights the importance of having realistic expectations. When it comes to building a physique.
Absolutely.
Which the source emphasizes a lot.
It's about understanding that achieving that extreme social media perfect body
right.
through natural means alone is often just not realistic for most people. So it's about shifting the focus from chasing an unattainable ideal to celebrating consistent, sustainable progress with your natural potential.
Yeah, and the author shares their own experience. They've got over 20 years.
Of natural training and competing.
Exactly.
And they really highlight that point, that building a solid, sustainable physique naturally requires time, consistent effort, and a long-term perspective.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
For sure.
Yeah.
And for those who might still be considering using SARMs, despite these warnings, the source does offer some advice.
They do.
Tell me.
Yeah, they suggest that if someone, as a fully informed adult, still decides to use SARMs, they should always start with the lowest effective dose.
Okay.
Minimize those potential side effects. Leave room for adjustments. If they need to in the future.
And they talk about newbie gains. Both in the context of natural training and with SARMs.
So they're pointing out that the most dramatic gains in muscle and strength, whether you're just starting to lift weights naturally, or beginning your first cycle of SARMs,
tend to occur in that initial period. Subsequent cycles of SARMs or continued natural training will yield smaller returns.
So diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something important to weigh when you're considering the long-term value and the risks.
For sure. Now, the source takes a really interesting turn when it starts to examine like the motivations behind wanting this super muscular physique. It challenges a pretty common assumption.
It does. The author suggests that while many people might believe that a muscular physique is primarily attractive to women, their experience has been that it actually gets more attention from other men.
Interesting.
So it's prompting us to think more deeply about our fitness goals and why we're really doing this.
Totally. And ultimately it guides the reader toward like this more holistic and sustainable approach to fitness.
Absolutely.
Emphasizing the focus on becoming the best version of yourself.
I love that.
Through natural methods. Consistent training, healthy diet, regular cardio.
Exactly.
Really emphasizing those sustainable habits. And fostering genuine human connection.
It's not all about looks.
Right.
Lasting relationships, self-worth. Those things aren't built on physical appearance alone.
Totally. And then for anyone still uncertain about using SARMs, the source has some very direct guidance, doesn't it?
They do. The advice is very clear. If there's any doubt in your mind about taking SARMs, then the answer is no. It's a decision that shouldn't be taken lightly, given the potential consequences.
Totally. And just before concluding, they mention a couple of non-SARM products, specifically G-Test and 3-Test, as potential aids for natural testosterone production.
But they make it clear that these are not meant to be a replacement for PCT. So they're presenting these as potential supportive supplements for maintaining healthy testosterone levels alongside a healthy lifestyle.
So it all comes back to those fundamentals.
Exactly. It's all about that foundation, natural health.
So to sum it all up, the key takeaway from this deep dive into SARMs is that while they offer this tempting prospect of rapid muscle growth, strength increases. The potential downsides, particularly those risks associated with testosterone suppression, and the psychological drive to keep using them are substantial and should not be underestimated.
They should not be. The source is really urging us to not prioritize those short-term physique goals over those long-term health implications. And the fact that these substances are now so easily accessible, especially by young people, makes it even more concerning.
It does, This leads to a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. Even after this is over.
Okay, shoot.
In a world where information and substances like this are so readily available, how can people develop a more sustainable, healthy, and balanced mindset toward their fitness goals and navigating these often unrealistic expectations that we see on social media.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
It's something worth pondering.
It is food for thought.
Yeah, for sure.